Hi.
Hi.
Welcome to AT Astro. I said that I wasn't going to do the intro, but I guess Ellie Moreing being back on the AT Astro channel would be just totally incomplete without a proper introduction. Thanks for coming back.
I'm happy to finally be back after this freaking long-ass Mercury Retrograde that has been keeping me away from internet for a long enough time, and I've had enough. I've got my internet back. I'm happy.
You know what's cool? Not cool, but interesting. And it's funny you brought up Mercury Retrograde because I was thinking about this a lot lately. How retrogrades tend to affect different people, and all of the crazy shit surrounding Mercury Retrograde, and just like at its, I don't know, Mercury Retrograde's like the basic bitch topic for people who are starting to get into astrology.
Yeah, and it's kind of like people like, oh, I just hate Mercury Retrograde. And it's like, why? And they're like, because it's Mercury Retrograde. I'm like, okay.
Well, it got me thinking, and I started like really doing a little bit of research into it and how Mercury Retrograde works for different people, or just retrogrades in general. And I'm beginning to realize that it really depends on the chart how Mercury Retrograde is going to affect you. There are some people where Mercury Retrograde causes some significant impairments. Like for instance, if you have a Gemini rising, Mercury is your chart ruler.
And Virgo sun. For me, Mercury retrogrades is just like I made a conscious effort this retrograde not to make any decisions whatsoever, and I was just like, because I knew if I did start anything, I would end up not doing it after retrograde. And I had so many ideas I wanted to do during Mercury retrograde. I held off doing them. And then now it's over. I'm so glad I said no. Because I just don't care about that anymore. And I'm like, cool.
So when looking at retrogrades, it just all of a sudden became a lot more apparent to me that you pay attention to what Mercury's ruling in your chart, and you pay attention to what house it's transiting through.
Yeah.
So, like, if you have a Gemini rising or a Virgo rising, Mercury retrograde is just, like, straight up gonna fuck you up a lot more than most people, because it's your chart ruler. I mean, it represents you. It represents you fucking up all the time. And that goes for the other retrogrades, too. Like Mars retrograde or Venus retrograde, or for instance, I was just talking about this earlier to you, Jupiter retrograde ends on the 11th. Thank fucking God. It rules two angular houses in my chart. It rules the 7th house and the 10th house. Now, you don't agree with me on the whole 10th house for your particular chart.
I'm just saying, like, for me, resonating with Aries rising.
I mean, okay, so what would... Yeah. So, like, for instance, I was talking to this woman the other day, and we were talking about Venus retrograde. And I noticed that Venus ruled her 6th house. And I was like, did something happen to you, what happened to you during the last Venus retrograde? Like, did you get sick? Or she was like, oh, well, I was working out and I fucked my knees up really, really bad and had to go to the emergency room. And I was like, okay, so Venus rules your 6th house. So Venus retrograde obviously was detrimental for your, health in some way, some incidents related to your health. And so, like, Mercury, for me, rules my 4th house, and it rules my 1st house. And it's my chart ruler. Yours as well, correct?
Depending on what chart that you use, whether that's like whole sign or was it use equal house, or was it whole sign?
Whole sign.
Yeah, so if you were to use whole sign, I would be the same as you, but for me, I use Placidus. So for me, it's my 1st house and my 3rd house, because I've got Virgo on the 3rd using Placidus.
Yeah. So what did Mercury retrograde do for you?
This past one, basically, I signed a contract to do some illustrations for Biddy Tarot. And as soon as I got a contract, contracts and Mercury retrograde scared the living hell out of me. So I made sure when I got the contract that I read through every single line of what was on it. And I'm just like, do I understand this clearly? and how it's going to go down and all that sort of thing. But because that opportunity came up just as Mercury was just going into retrograde, the fact that I had to make that decision then was kind of like sort of thing, because like I said, I know for me that things are so much easier when you know how to work with transit energy. They don't dictate things, and this is what I explained. I can't remember if it was you or someone else who I explained the nature of transits. It's not that they impose how things are going to manifest. It's more like, for example, if you're at a beach, right, and you get caught in a rip and you get pulled out, what we're told here in Australia, because we have lots of beaches and stuff like that, and so we you're told never to try and swim against the current of a rip, because that will just wear you out, it'll make you tired, and then it can pull you out further. But if you swim diagonally towards the current of the rip, you can swim your way out of it, and then you can work your way out and get back to shore. And that's what my metaphor for transits is, that you can learn to work with the energy that's kind of going on to make things a lot more easier for you and make it a lot less frustrating, because there's a lot less tension that you're trying to push or force something against.
That's true, actually. I don't know if I was the one who was telling you about that, but it's like the whole, like if let's say you're like steering a horse, like it's a horse and carriage type situation. And the more you try to like jerk the horse in a certain direction, the horse is going to fight against you. So when you just sort of kind of try to guide the energy and you guide the horse, you sort of, you allow things to manifest more pleasantly, rather than, fighting against the current and then drowning, off the coast of Australia.
You know how with the whole Gemini rising thing and how we can get distracted with things super easy? You've got like a photo behind your head of a hand, right? So I'm seeing like the hand like this behind your head, and I'm like, yeah, like that. I was like, oh, my brain. I love it. But yeah, that's kind of like a...
Look like a rooster. Yeah, rooster head. What kind of pulled my transit game to the next level really is taking into account not just what planets are being affected, but what houses are ruled by said planet, just like with retrogrades. So, like for instance, Uranus is currently squaring my moon. Exactly. And a little while ago, Uranus was squaring my Saturn. Really, exactly. And Saturn rules my ninth house, and when Uranus was squaring Saturn, the ruler of my ninth house, I went on a lot of very off the cusp trips, like randomly just buying plane tickets and just going places just because I wanted to. It's a pretty good transit. That's actually completely different than what Robert Hand describes Uranus square Saturn in his book Planets in Transit, because it made it seem really, really negative. And in many ways it can be negative, but... And then Uranus has been squaring my moon right now. The moon's the ruler of my second house. My finances have been very either money's coming in faster than I can handle it, or nothing. It's really crazy. So it's just interesting. Another one, probably the worst transit I've probably had to ever deal with is Neptune is currently squaring my natal Mars exactly. And Mars rules my 11th house. So what are my hopes and dreams dissolving?
I think it's so much dissolving. It's more like the nature of the vision versus the action. Are you dreaming so much that you can't actually put it into tangible action, or is it confusion of how you can actually start to manifest the vision?
That's actually pretty accurate.
It's what I do.
Yeah, so we have Jupiter is finally stationing direct on the 11th of August, so thank God. I'm pretty excited about that one. It's actually another interesting thing that I've come across lately is I've noticed if you look at a Davison chart for somebody or a relationship, retrogrades, you look at the ruler of the Davison chart, and retrogrades can completely sort of fuck things up in that relationship. So, for instance, a relationship that I was involved in, Jupiter is the chart ruler, and Jupiter retrograde signaled like the beginning of the end of that. And it's just I've noticed that like it seems like things are far more stable in the relationship if the chart ruler is like, let's say, Leo or the sun. Sun never goes retrograde.
Yeah. Funny that you say that though, because in my Placidus chart, I actually have Leo intercepted, so the sun doesn't rule anything in my chart.
Define intercepted. Let's go into that real fast. Like what that's something that I never really understood a whole bunch, because I use the whole sign a lot. I don't really take into account intercepted houses. I've heard quite a few things about intercepted houses, like it's either an area of your chart that you hide, or like what is an interception?
I do not resonate with that at all, because I have a stellium in my second house and it's intercepted. Like, I don't hide my Leo stuff.
Yeah.
Who does? Like, if you've got Leo stuff, who does? So I've got like my Mars, Venus, Mercury, and my Sun and my North Node all in my second house. And it's intercepted. But what people say about intercepted houses, they're like, oh, that's something that you may not be aware of in yourself, or that you hide from others, or you don't know how to express it. I'm like, no, I'm good. I express it pretty well. I also have Uranus and Neptune in my 8th, which is also intercepted. That's like 80% of my planets intercepted. Yeah. But I don't resonate with that depiction of like, if you have planets intercepted, you don't know how to utilize them or whatever. It's more so that I literally feel like it's more to do with the fact that you've got a doubling of a zodiac sign on different houses, right? So it's more that part of your life was more so emphasized in life areas, rather than the fact that you're not expressing the planetary energy in that house. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So for me, I've got a doubling of Scorpio houses and Taurus houses. So I have Scorpio on my 5th and 6th. And for me, what I find fun is actually the same as what I love to work. Like, those things for me are meshed together. And for me, when it comes to friendships and relationships and my spirituality, those things are meshed together for me. And that's just how my life has, like, progressed pretty much. But in terms of, like, the rulerships for that, I've also contemplated that, because for me, that means that Venus rules my 4th, my 11th, and my 12th.
Well, okay, but riddle me this then. What do you make of somebody who has, or who's from a really, really northern latitude? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. When the midhaven stretches like way into like, and the midhaven's like in the 7th house or some shit like that. Like,
I was about to bring that up too, because I have read for a chart for someone who is it Sweden, I think? Someone way up north, but her chart.
Sweden, Finland, Canada, Argentina, areas like that. It's gonna come off really. It's gonna look really weird.
Yeah. I tried using Placidus, and her 7th house swallowed up 3 zodiac signs, and the other ones are like tiny, and I'm like, that's not gonna work. Okay, so this is the only time I've ever gone with like an equal house and whole sign system, because I'm like, it's just not practical. Like, it's like, I don't feel like it's practical using the Placidus system for people who are really far north or really far south, because it's a really hard one to kind of contemplate, because it's like,
because okay, then at what point are you just changing the rules to fit what you're trying to do? Like, can you do that? That seems weird to me. That's the biggest problem I have with Placidus. Is like, I feel that if you are moving around your systems so that it works, like at what point are you trotting the line of like how valid is it? Like it's weird. It's hard for me to. These are questions that I ask myself a lot. Like I'll say this. I mean, even on my podcast, I don't even care. Like occasionally, I wouldn't say I have doubts related to astrology, but with certain ways that astrology works, I kind of like throw myself into mini existential crises over astrology a lot.
Yeah, like I've had the exact same thing because like I'm a Virgo sun and I'm all about like second house Virgo sun at that. Like I'm all about like practicality and validity of what I do and what I use. And I remember when I first started learning astrology is that I was scared and worried that I was starting to believe something that was like not real sort of thing. Like, because I was like, I don't want to be like one of those people that are like super wishy-washy and like, you know, so far out of this world that you can't even have a conversation with them sort of thing. So essentially when it comes to what like I've found about my chart, like I've had people throw different systems at me, like not just whole sign and equal, but like all these other ones. Like I can't remember, one's called like Coke or something, like Koch, something like that.
Oh yeah, like Coke. Yeah. It is pronounced Coke.
Yeah, and some other different types of charts, and they say, oh, just try these out and see how you resonate with these, how does it change your chart and things like that. And recently I've been contemplating the nature of my second house Virgo sun, because the way my personality actually is like we discussed earlier, is that I'm very much of the mind. Like I love to learn, I love to communicate, I love to, you know, think about the high information and then kind of simplify it and communicate it to people in like an easier to understand way. And that would make perfect sense if my Virgo sun was in the third house conjunct my north node. And I'm drawing down ninth house information to be expressed outwards through a form of communication. I would still resonate with second house stuff because I would still have my Leo stuff in the second, but my sun would be shifted to the third. So these are some things like for anyone watching this, like to contemplate about their own chart, is that like, do you truly believe you resonate with what's in your chart? And also don't be scared to kind of experiment with what works for you, because the cool thing when it comes to like the existential crisis with astrology, you can tell you're having that moment because you're putting too much of yourself into the chart. Like you're using it too much to define who you are rather than actually going back into yourself and going like who is this actually me? Does this actually describe me, or am I kind of just riffing off my chart?
Well, then you start to get into other forms of astrology, especially like the older ancient, like Hellenistic astrology, and it will scare the shit out of you. It becomes like, not am I this chart? Like, is this my personality? It's more of like, it turns into this whole like, is this my destiny? The natal chart is considered in many senses, in many ways, the natal chart's considered to be like a covenant. It's a promise. Like attributes that you supposedly receive from your natal chart are considered to be gifts, and you are promised to have these gifts, and then over time they will come forward to help you whenever you need them in certain situations, like trines and sextiles, or you know, bonification, whatnot, main benefics, main malefics, constructive planets versus, you know, destructive planets. But in that same sense, though, the difficult aspects of your chart are also very much promised to you. Like, if you start to really get into Hellenistic, especially if you read Chris Brennan's book, it can leave you like wondering, like, wow, according to this book, I'm fucked. According to these certain techniques, like if you using triplicities and whatnot, like I'm fucked. My life's going to be hard and horrible. And then you're like, well, maybe I'm just going to choose not to believe that. And so then it's like, well, then where do you draw the line? Am I just taking in the information that I want to take in that fits and serves my ego and who I view myself to be? And it becomes this whole big giant thing. And actually, I wanted to talk a little bit about that too. Like, what about astrology? Like, what makes it valid to you? Like, because if you go like searching through YouTube, you look at like, have you ever seen the astrology debunked videos or anything like that?
I don't watch those sort of things because I'm just like, I've watched them for other topics, but not astrology specifically.
Okay. It's really interesting to sort of like listen to them and pick them apart, and I want to do a video on that specifically. It's like Neil deGrasse Tyson. You know who Neil deGrasse Tyson is, right?
No.
He is an astrophysicist, a world famous astrophysicist.
Okay, I think I may know him now.
And he loves bashing astrology. And I think it's interesting because most of the arguments against astrology are based in total misconceptions to begin with. Now, we can get into the whole, like, well, sun sign astrology is basic to begin with. And they're saying, like, no, it has nothing to even do with that. It's like, well, all the zodiac signs are based upon where the sun is at or what constellation it's under at that time of the year. And he's like, well, that's bullshit because of the precession of the equinoxes. So, like, you know, those shift over time. But that's not even it. It's the signs are actually, they're placed where they're at based on the rotation of the seasons. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to talk about that. So, for instance, if you look at like the start date of fall, spring, winter, summer, those all fall exactly to the date at the beginning of each cardinal sign.
I could rival you with that though, because in the southern hemisphere it's different.
But it's switched.
Yeah, I know, but it makes it different for the signs. Like for me, I'm a winter Virgo. Yeah.
Yeah, but the seasons change on the exact same dates, though, correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, like, you take a season and you divide it into 3 parts. And the cardinal sign is always the beginning of the season. The fixed sign is always the beginning or the middle of the season, and the mutable sign is always the close of the season. And then once the new cardinal sign comes up, then that's the beginning of the new season.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's actually how it's arranged. And then there is actual statistical information. There's statistics that show that more than suggest that prove that there are specific medical disorders like seasonal depressive disorder, alcoholism, suicide rates, or whatever. They're more prominent among people that are born on certain months or in certain days. So that in itself would suggest that the time you were born actually has some direct impact on the course of your life, statistically speaking.
Yeah.
And then, and I've done a lot of research into a lot of this just to try to figure out like what the meaning behind all of this is. Like, what am I doing devoting all of this time into something that I can't outwardly prove? And so, I mean, there's a lot of things to support it. And then at the same time, like, I'm wondering, like, is this just like a hobby that I kind of like took too far? I don't know.
Yeah, well, the thing is with something else I've contemplated with astrology is that I tend to not go so much into like the system itself in terms of looking at people's natal charts. I've contemplated the actual nature of astrology and why it is positioned the way it is, like in terms of the zodiac signs. So you do have the seasonal stuff, but I've contemplated the way that the zodiac actually reflects human nature and the human experience, because you've got like the progression of the signs, which is like Aries is the baby, then you go to Taurus is like the more toddler aspect, which is more about like learning how to operate in a physical body, learning about like the sensory qualities and things like that. Then Gemini's, when they get a bit older, learning how to communicate and so on and so forth. But then you take that scope out even further, and then you look at the nature of the aspects that are inherent within the zodiac signs. So, for example, like, you know, like Sagittarius trines Leo, for example. Like, thinking about it in that nature, I've kind of seen, like, how things operate in the everyday world in the same system as reflecting astrology, using it as, like, a map. So I know that's getting, like, a little bit technical, but, for example, let's take the cardinal signs, for example, which is all about, like, sort of your direction and more so your role. when it relates to yourself and other people. So you have your individual role at the first house or Aries, your family role, your relationship role, and then your career role or your role in society. And so basically in these 4 different areas, you can kind of seemingly be a different person in these areas of life, but it's more so about like how in relation to you, because the nature of the square, the grand square that's actually in between those signs, how do you operate in these different areas respectively to that?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it very much so does.
So
and you can,
sorry.
you're taking the more of the philosophical approach to it, which is understandable. And the thing about most, I wouldn't say atheists, but cynics, is they don't appreciate a philosophical approach to anything. It has to be conclusively measured. It has to be conclusively proven. And if you can't disprove it, then it's not even worth testing. So that in of itself actually garners a lot of blowback against astrology. That's a lot of why it's considered to be a quote unquote pseudoscience. And in exploring astrology and exploring the history of astrology and why it's at where it's at now, why it has the reputation that it has, I'm beginning to realize, and this is going to sound kind of bad, but the worst enemy of astrology is astrologers.
True, I feel that in a sense, but something else I've also seen is
and I'll explain why I feel that way in a moment, but yes, go ahead.
Yeah, it's so I'm a graphic designer, yes. So for me, I will walk into a bookshop and I'll be immediately attracted to the most prettiest books on the shelf, the ones that have got the prettiest covers, the best illustrations and whatsoever. You read the content, half the time, I'm sorry, it's crap. Because it's regurgitating, like, star sign stuff. It's just regurgitation of the same information and not actually understanding it, if that makes sense. It's more just like, well, Virgo means this and this and this and this, so I'm just going to put this in a book, share it out, and then people buy it, they read it, regurgitate it, and it's the same thing. I kind of blame schooling systems for that because we're taught to learn, memorize, regurgitate. We're not really taught to contemplate or have our own opinions of things. Some of the best metaphysical books I've found are usually the most ugliest, unfortunately, but they have the best content. But the thing is, and this is what I'm studying in my degree, it's like the nature of like design and desire. So for buying a book, I've got some good ones somewhere. I must have put them away. But essentially, I've got this book that's like this thick on the tarot. It's not the prettiest book ever, but it's amazing. Like, it's got so much great content. I feel like people are more drawn towards the kind of new age stuff, which is all about like pretty glitter and crystals. And you would have seen my Instagram. I've actually kind of designed it to be super aesthetic, but because I know astrology, I know tarot and other systems, I'm not trying to put out stuff that regurgitated information. Like, I'm using the aesthetics as a vehicle, but essentially what I'm trying to get to is that, people aren't actually taking the time to understand it properly. They're just going with what's the most popular thing, what's the most niche thing that I can just kind of quickly understand.
Exactly. Because unfortunately, like you said, the education system doesn't really condition us to be deep thinkers. It doesn't condition us to dive into topics in depth unless we're making money off of it. So what they try to really get us to do is just look for information that's really neatly packaged and just, I mean, and you look at YouTube too, like a lot of history, because I'm a history fanatic. And the most popular history videos are not the in-depth documentary. They are summarized versions of historical events. And a lot of them are even put into cartoon form so that they're more pleasant and enjoyable to watch. So, I mean, I guess that's just human nature. And I wouldn't really call it like a critique of society, because I think people may have always been like that. It's all the instant gratification, the dopamine release, and so that's why sun sign astrology is as popular as it is. It's simple, it's overwhelmingly simple, and it's pretty. I mean, you get neat little graphics to go along with every single little zodiac sign. Like, Scorpio is this pretty little scorpion, or Sagittarius is this awesome little, Greek centaur-looking thing that evokes so many things within the imagination just by taking one look at the symbol for Sagittarius or an actual graphic design picture of that sign and what it implies.
And that's because I am studying graphic design and I'm doing my best to understand the human nature in terms of what they're attracted to, because I am making a conscious effort to design things for the spiritual community that is pleasant to look at, but it's actually got solid information about it. And I don't just mean my own, I mean from every single resource I have read myself that may be the not pretty book, but I'm filtering that information to make it more pleasant to people to actually want to engage with it.
So you're trying to take high value information and package it in a way that it's more accessible.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
That's fucking amazing. I actually really respect you for that, for actually consciously taking that route. Yeah.
That's my second
What?
My second house at work. Virgo, second house, simplifying things, making it easy for people, but yeah.
Yes. And then my abundance of 8th house energy, it finds any sort of superficiality in anything to be abhorrent, and that puts me at odds with most of society, unfortunately. But
because yeah, sorry.
No. Dites-moi.
I was just about to say, and also people when it comes to either your astrological practice or whether you do tarot or whatever it is, I feel like you start to dig yourself a hole when you become so dogmatic about your own opinion, your own approach to it, that if anyone whatsoever tries to implement a new idea and you shut them down, I feel like that's kind of your red flag to say hey, you're kind of segregating yourself.
That's what killed astrology. I'm not kidding. Okay, yeah. So the whole astrological model was built around the concept that everything revolves around the earth, including the sun. And whenever astronomers started to really push the idea that it was the opposite, that the earth revolves around the sun and that we're not the center of the universe, one of the major opponents of that concept was astrologers, because they had become very dogmatic in their beliefs in regards to how the universe, how the solar system works. And they were like, well, astrology says that this, and if we were to allow this idea that the sun revolves around, or that the earth revolves around the sun and not vice versa, then it could bring down, astrology. And so in an attempt for self-preservation and defending the old ways of thinking, once it became apparent that their, concept of how the solar system worked was false, they really kind of put themselves in a hole. They discredited themselves by refusing to acquiesce to new ideas. And that's when that goes back to what I was saying, how astrologers have a lot of times been the worst enemy of astrology.
Even against other astrologers, when you they have a different idea, and I understand this on a psychological level that people do, is that in order to validate their own opinion of something, they need the other person to agree half the time. So it's they put their ideas or project their ideas out into another astrologer and they go, thanks, but that's not how I read. So, and then some more often reaction is that they go oh, well, you're doing it wrong because I've done this for this many years, it's always worked for me, and that's just how it is, you're wrong, sort of thing. So when it gets into that with whatever it is that you do, that's just a whole level of no-no, I feel. Because for us, for example, we both have different approaches, but we're not at each other's throats saying you have to use whole sign or you have to use Placidus.
I knew you were bringing that up.
That I'm just saying as an example. It's like, for me personally, it's like the whole nature of perspective, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, I was telling you about that person that I watch, Gary Vaynerchuk, in terms of his videos and stuff. I watched a recent episode of him talking about he actually listens to what his haters say, because of the fact that he's like, you can't just shut people out for saying something negative because there could potentially be some truth in what someone else is saying. So, for example, it's like you can tell the difference if someone is projecting onto you and they're just their opinion and it's got nothing to do with what you actually said or did. So, for example, it's like if I don't know, read someone's chart and I may have misinterpreted something, and then another astrologer came in and said, well, actually, I don't feel like it's that. I feel like it's this. And then whoever's the chart's being read agreed with the other person. I'm not going to lash out at the person I read for and the other astrologer saying, well, you're both wrong because, like, I've done this method for other people and it's been accurate. It's more like I'd be better off saying, okay, how did they approach it, and where, like, how could I implement that in my own thing, and where did I potentially misinterpret, rather than just immediately putting a guard up and saying, like, no, like, no.
Yeah, and that's you see that not just in the astrological community. I mean, you see it in the scientific community actually a great deal.
Everywhere.
So, like,
behavior.
Yeah, it is. Have you ever heard of quantum entanglement?
No, but sounds interesting.
Quantum entanglement is actually, astrologers have discussed this many times as a way that proves astrology. I don't really think there's anything that proves astrology. I mean, it's based on faith, much like any religion. In fact, most science is based on faith, especially since science is consistently proving itself wrong. And then,
I don't know how many times white bread is being called unhealthy and then healthy and then unhealthy in my news.
Yes.
I like bread.
Well, quantum entanglement is it's an observed phenomenon that exists in quantum mechanics. So, like, two particles that at one point in time were touching each other, or were close enough for there to be a wave between them, they can be spread out over a very, very long distance, sometimes even light years away, and that even though they're spaced out, there is instances where one particle moving will instantaneously affect the other particle, no matter how far away from each other they are. Yeah. So information that's traveling faster than the speed of light, and there's really no way to explain it. Like, Albert Einstein referred to it as a quote unquote spooky movement at great distances. He called it spooky. Like he didn't even understand, especially how to even really explain it. So, for instance, if all of the molecules in our body, all of the elements that make up our physical being, they exist everywhere in the universe. So, like, in essence, we are made of the universe.
Yeah.
The actions of, let's say, a planetary body could theoretically have an impact at the molecular level on an individual. I mean, most scientists support the notion that, the molecules within our body are, composed of, it's a scientific fact. I mean, we are the universe. The universe exists in all of us. Neil deGrasse Tyson will tell you this himself. So, like, just that in and of itself shows that astrology can't really be discounted. And then on another level, I've heard astrology be described as something that was created by primitive society. So, like, I know I keep fixating on Neil deGrasse Tyson, but I remember, like, being rather enraged at the arrogance of a lot of his statements in regards to astrology, especially on the Joe Rogan Experience. For people watching this, I would definitely check that out. It'll make you mad. So he was like, so the sun in Aquarius, the water bearer, these primitive people would basically, well, the sun's moving through Aquarius, the water bearer, it's going to rain. We need rain for food. Rain makes food. So the level of arrogance and discounting the knowledge of ancient cultures is absolutely it's astounding to me. So like the Dark Ages, there was a whole period of time where ancient knowledge and knowledge of the Romans and Hellenistic cultures was completely lost for centuries. And then whenever that knowledge is recovered, it sparked the Renaissance. It sparked a whole new period of advancement within Europe. It's happened before. We have lost touch with ancient knowledge, and then the knowledge gets reintroduced later, and then we learn from it because it was fucking valid.
Yeah.
So at what point when are we going to understand that science has progressed to spectacular levels, especially in the past 50 years, but we still don't know everything. We still can't explain everything. There's still things that are being drug up from the past that affect our perceptions of the present. So that has a lot to do with my thoughts and theories of astrology. And I guess it's my own way of making sense of something that I've devoted so much effort into. And I think it's funny that we kind of like, maybe I sort of guided it in this direction. But I think it's interesting that we sort of started with just Mercury retrograde, and then we're like discussing the nature of astrology.
Yeah, the card that we pulled for the what would we talk about today came out as a magician. So I'm like, whatever comes to us, we'll just let it flow out. But
well, it's an interesting subject, and
yeah, subject.
I mean, so I also found it really interesting as I watched several videos on YouTube today of basically people trying to guess other people's zodiac signs, and it was the same group of people. With different people guessing their signs basically, and for the most part a lot of them were wrong. Like for the most part a lot of the guesses were wrong. They were just guessing sun signs. But what I did notice is very consistently certain people in these groups, they were correctly identified multiple times. Like one woman who was a Leo, she was identified as being a Leo by multiple people. They took one look at her and listened to her talk and the way she acted, and they're like, "Oh, you're a Leo." Yeah, and the same thing for the Pisces girl too.
That's the thing, is that I hate guessing people's sun signs because especially when people find out I'm an astrologer and stuff, they're like, "Oh, what sun sign do you think I am?" And I'm like, could be one of 12. It's like, the reason why I say that, because I tend to guess people's moon signs or their rising more so than their sun. And some people I can pick up on the energy of them, but I can't kind of pinpoint it perfectly every single time, sort of thing. Like, for example, I'm going to go back to Gary Vaynerchuk because that's the first person that's on my mind right now. I thought he was an Aries. When I watch his videos, I'm like, he's so, like, direct, fast-hitting, like, just fast-paced. I'm like, oh, shit, he's got to be an Aries. He has Mars on his midheaven, exactly, pretty much, but he's actually a Scorpio sun, Virgo rising, Pisces moon. And so it really depends on what angle that you're coming from, but sometimes you can pick out things in people because of your synastry with them, where that lands in your chart, because that's kind of what resonates with you. Like, I can pick up Leos, like, so, hello. Leos and I risings typically. Things I struggle with is like Pisces, Cancers, and Libras. Like, I have a hard time picking up on them.
I can pick up on a Libra really well, actually. Libras, and I don't know. I try not to guess people's sun sign because I honestly consider it sort of insulting to them, because people are layered and complex, and astrology allows for that. I mean, people are really, really deep, and your sun sign is honestly like not all that important. Like, I don't know. I could have lived my entire life without knowing I was fucking Capricorn.
Yeah.
I would have been just fine. And it didn't really do a whole lot of good for me. What did do me a lot of good is understanding the mechanics of my Venus-Pluto conjunction and how that worked out for me, and how the problems that was causing in my life.
Yeah.
That was really helpful for me. And then that's another thing is like many people say, well, who fucking cares if it's real or if it's not? Because it's giving us the desire to look into ourselves and sort of try to take an honest look at who we are and why we do what we do. And that in itself is really important.
And that's why... Sorry.
Why'd you recall?
Sorry?
Go ahead.
It's my Libra moon. I'm just like, sorry. What I was going to say is that's why I don't just do astrology, but that's why I've gone into things like human design, and also something that's even more new is called the gene keys. Now, I think the gene keys have only been around like, I don't even know if it was just from the late 1990s. I'll have to do more research on that, but it's a very new system. And I've used the gene keys recently. It's a lot more complex than... Well, I wouldn't say it's more complex. It's just something completely different. But it's very new. But I have found it very incredibly impactful in terms of my self-discovery, because the whole point of the gene keys is that it's about contemplation. Because you don't get... It's not like astrology where you read up an interpretation of your moon sign or whatever. With the gene keys, they'll give you a couple of keywords, and you have to contemplate what that means for you. It's like, it's all about if you can kind of decode it. But if you're not someone who's naturally a contemplative person, if you don't like really thinking about ideas and playing with them, it's probably not a system that would be fun for you to use, because there is no like hardcore descriptions of things, just some basic information, and then you kind of unhook that yourself. Then you got human design, another approach again. But essentially, because I've gone into depth with each of these things, they essentially come back to the kind of core essential things about my personality. They just come about them in different directions, but I pretty much get the same kind of information.
Yeah.
And that's what you want. Like, you don't want to get different interpretations of different systems.
I remember you doing actually a thing on human design for me, and I was actually quite blown away by it. But it was all things that you could look at my natal chart and you could find it in just a slightly different way. I do remember that. I did find it very, very interesting. And then there were a couple new things that you brought up that were definitely resonated with me and my natal chart. There's just I don't know. It's interesting because astrology is just like the easiest for people to grasp because of the simplicity of the 12 sun signs. And there are some other methods, not just speaking about human design. Like, have you ever heard of Uranian astrology?
I've heard of it. I don't know much about it though.
Uranian astrology is hyper complex, but incredibly accurate. So, like, I'll tell you a little bit of a story. There was a surveyor, a German surveyor in World War I by the name of Alfred Wick, and he believed that he could time artillery bombardments. So, like, he was on the front lines with Germany and Russia, and so he believed that he could use astrology to figure out when the Russians were going to unload, artillery barrages. And with regular astrology, he couldn't do it. But over time, he developed the Uranian method, which is a very complex system that employs a lot of midpoints. And it takes the entire traditional chart for astrology and just throws it in the dumpster and starts using a fourth harmonic dial. And it's very difficult, but it's very useful and very, very potent. And with that system, he was able to, with frightening accuracy, predict artillery bombardments. On top of that, he could predict like soldiers getting shot and what time they would get shot. And it was just scary. Also, he discovered that he mathematically, using these midpoints, discovered Pluto 10 years before Pluto was actually discovered by astronomers. And so he created the Hamburg School of Astrology, and he had an association of astrologers that was working with him at the Hamburg School. But during the rise of the Third Reich, stuff started to happen. So they spoke out against Hitler, and they actually, using Uranian astrology, prophesized what Hitler would end up doing. And the SS raided the printing press, burned everything down, and arrested all of the astrologers and put them all into concentration camps, with the one exception of Alfred Witt, and they found him dead in his apartment. They don't know if he killed himself or if he was killed, but that whole thing happened. But one of the astrologers actually survived the concentration camps and rebuilt, was able to recover a lot of the information, was able to recover a copy of Points in Planetary Pictures by Alfred Witt, and rebuild Uranian astrology, and it survives today. But it is like spooky accurate. And I know that was a little bit of a tangent, but I think the story is extremely interesting and definitely worth talking about.
Like my South Node in Pisces 8th house loves the intense stuff. Like when it comes to using metaphysics, like I love the dark stuff when it comes to that. I'm just so intrigued by it, and I want to get to that point where I'm able to do that kind of freaky stuff, but like not so much I want to go to concentration camps because of it, but being able to be super accurate in that.
Yes. The thing about Uranian astrology, however, is it's difficult to access because, one, it's really complicated. 2, Points in Planetary Pictures is a really expensive book. And then 3, the software that you would have to use to draw out these charts is extremely expensive. And it makes it really inaccessible to people, despite the fact that it is probably one of the most accurate predictive techniques in existence, in my opinion.
That would be nice.
Yeah. And actually, I've talked to Uranian astrologers, and they have told me firsthand that there is a conspiracy amongst traditional or modern astrologers to suppress Uranian astrology because it upends the whole system. Mm-hmm. That it's been systematically pushed down and kind of like covered to the side, like the other astrologers won't deal with it. But it does pop up, however, because cosmobiology is related very much to it. It uses a lot of midpoints. Robert Hand, Robert Hand is, yeah. He employs and talks about the Uranian technique because it's the building block of composite charts. It's what composite charts are based off of, is the Uranian method and using midpoints, and because of his background in cosmobiology. But it's just, there's a whole lot of stuff going on just beneath the surface in the astrological community. It is just interesting.
I'm going to have to search later.
Yes, and then on there's a lot going on, and within the astrological community, there is a lot of pretty screwed up stuff happening. I mean, I don't know, like individuals using astrology as a way to like find people to manipulate and emotionally abuse women, and I've seen that recently.
I was about to bring that one up about because I feel like that's going into we could do a whole nother video about this. I feel is talking about the ethics in terms of being able to practice these sort of things, because it's all too easy to get someone's birth information and read it into them, and then it becomes a bit boundary related things. So that's going into a whole nother topic about ethics and morality and
yeah, and I've witnessed it firsthand. I mean, there was an individual recently that was specifically looking for women that had Venus-Neptune aspects, or heavy 12th house aspects, or heavy Pisces aspects, heavy Pisces placements, because he felt like that would put them in a position to where he could manipulate. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. I've never seen anything like it in my life.
No, I've seen that as well, but it's funny when people exchange charts with that as well, so you can see into them and they can see into you, so then it becomes you have to have an immense amount of trust with the person that you give your chart to, I think, because it's if you know how to appeal to that person in a way that they like, that's where the manipulation stuff can actually come into these sort of things, and that's why, again, the morality kind of thing. But there's also misinterpretation as well, and you try and do something that's inauthentic and it actually doesn't work because you incorrectly interpreted someone's chart. I've had that happen before. I've had a similar experience where a guy tried to hit on me using my chart, and he tried to appeal to my second house stellium with, like, stuff. And I'm like, you're forgetting the fact that I have a stellium, this is what I'm all about. You can't give me more than what I already have. One. Secondly, I have Uranus opposition. I actually don't care about material stuff that much. And that's where the interpretation comes in. So it's things like that. And you can see what they're doing. And it's just like...
It's insane. You can cross a lot of boundaries very quickly using metaphysics, and people often do.
Oh, even with the tarot. Shit. Like, what's so-and-so doing right now? How they feel about me? Like...
tarot spying?
Oh my god, there's so many readings on YouTube, and I'm not hating on anyone who does pick a pole readings and stuff. I do them, I like them, but it's more for, like, guidance purposes, not so much like, will he come back to me? How do I get him to fall in love with me again? How does he feel about me? It's like...
I look at those little tarot picket cards. I love them. They're like the ice cream sandwiches of YouTube for me right now. Like, they're bad for me. They're so bad for me, but God, they're so delicious.
Like I said, I do them for my Instagram and stuff, but I'll do like 1 or 2 a week. But they're all about, like, self-work or guidance or direction or something like that. They never got anything to do with, like, relationships or material-based stuff, just because that's not what I'm about personally. I'm not saying that I don't like relationships. I'm just saying that, like, the whole how does he feel about me sort of thing is so, like, teenage girl, in my opinion. I'm sorry for anyone who thinks that, but just, I can't.
Well, I must be a fucking teenage girl because I'm doing the how do they feel about me, or will they ever come back, or...
Okay, how do they feel about me? How's Mike feel about me? Oh, I got the lovers! Yay! I didn't even plan that.
You could, yeah. Oh my god!
I didn't even plan that. That just happened. So I'm like, okay, cut.
Well, it's all fun and games until someone buys a plane ticket.
Don't even get me started on that, dude. Oh, that was not even. I did not plan that to happen. That was so good. Oh wow.
Well, I genuinely feel that we got to discuss quite a few great topics today. It just kind of came out of nowhere. It was probably the best off the cuff.
Oh yeah.
So once again, the beautiful Ellie Moreing. Well, until next time. Yeah, I hate to shut things off with such a fervor, but like, I will be posting, and I should put this at the beginning, and I probably will. I will be posting information down at the bottom to contact both Ellie Mae Astrology or Ellie Moreing, the Celestial Witch.
Yeah, Celestial.
And AT Astro's contact information as well for those who have managed to knuckle their way through this podcast. And yeah, it's been awesome.
Awesome. That was fun.
Till next time, Ellie.
Okay, catch you later.